The alien said the baby was already dead, and the alien was almost never wrong about such things. She said it from a tower of black glass 300 kilometers above the moon, into a recorder that no one on the moon could hear, and the recording would later be filed under specimen behavior, subset, maternal persistence in premortem conditions. She said it the way a doctor in another century might have said the bone is broken calmly, with the small, clean satisfaction of being right. Then she lifted a bulb of pale liquid to the slit between her mandibles and drank. Below her, on the moon called Caelus Roman 4, Charlotte Vance was sitting on the floor of a dying dome with her son in her lap, and she had not yet heard the alien's pronouncement, and even if she had, she would not have believed it. She was 26 years old, and she had buried a husband 11 weeks ago, and she had run out of believing things people told her about death. The dome had been built for 2,000. It now held 312. The lights had been set to mimic an Earth day cycle when the engineers were still alive to care about such things, but the engineers were no longer alive, and the lights now did whatever the failing reactor wanted them to do, which was mostly to flicker, and sometimes to go out entirely for stretches of 7 or 8 minutes. During those stretches you could hear the dome breathing. It breathed the way an old man breathes in the last week of his life, with a wet click at the bottom of every exhale, and the click was the sound of micrometeor patches working loose somewhere overhead, and everyone in the dome knew this and no one said it. Charlotte's son was 4 months old. His name was Tomas, after her father, who had been a baker in a city on Earth that no longer existed in any way that mattered. Tomas had a cough that had started 6 days ago as a small wet sound at the back of his throat, and had grown into something that shook his ribcage and made his small face turn a color Charlotte did not have a word for. Habrot, the medic had called it, when she had still been seeing patients. The medic was now in the cold room with the others, because the medic had also gotten Habrot, and the antibiotics had run out for everyone except the officers and the officers' children. And Charlotte's husband Pieter had been an officer, but Pieter had died in the strike, and his commission had died with him. She held Tomas against her chest and hummed. The song was an old one her mother had hummed when Charlotte was small and sick, and Pieter had teased her about it once in their first month together, saying she sounded like a broken kettle, and she had thrown a piece of bread at him, and he had eaten the bread, and they had laughed. She hummed it now because there was nothing else to do with her mouth that was useful. Tomas's small fingers were closed around the cuff of her sleeve. Above the dome, through the cracked panel of plex that served as a skylight, the gas giant Caelus filled half the sky. The colonists had used to call its light moonlight, even though the moon was the thing they were standing on, because human languages do not bend easily to new physics. The light was pale blue and a little green at the edges, and it came down through the plex in slow ribbons that moved across the floor as the moon turned. People in the dome had started calling the light a tan. Tintorella, an old woman from the Genoa block, called it, in the language she had spoken as a girl, a moon tan. You could die of it in the long run because of the radiation that came with it, but in the long run everyone in the dome was going to die of something, so no one minded the tan. And some of them stood under the skylight on purpose, the way people on Earth had once stood under the sun, because being warmed by a thing that was killing you was an old human habit and a hard one to break. Charlotte stood under it now with Tomas. She let the moonlight wash across his face. His skin was the color of skim milk gone slightly blue, and the moonlight made it look almost ordinary, almost the color a baby was supposed to be. She kept humming. Somewhere on the far side of the dome, the quartermaster's voice came over the speakers, announcing that oxygen rations would be cut by another 15%, effective immediately, and that anyone caught hoarding O2 cartridges would forfeit their place in the evacuation queue, when and if an evacuation became possible, which it would not, because there was nothing to evacuate to. Charlotte heard the voice and she did not stop humming. The voice belonged to a man named Vel. Vel had been a mid-grade logistics officer before the strike, and now he was the closest thing the dome had to a king, because he controlled the ration cards, and the ration cards controlled who breathed and who didn't, and a man with that kind of control became royal whether he was suited to it or not. Vel was not suited to it. Charlotte had known this before the strike, when Pieter had come home one night and described Vel as the kind of man who counted other men's drinks. She would have to go see Vel tomorrow. She knew this the way she knew the cough in Tomas's chest, with a still settled certainty that did not require thinking about. She would go see Vel because the antibiotics were not in the medical line anymore. They were in Vel's private locker, and Vel would not give them out for free, and she had nothing left to give him except the things that mattered. She kissed the top of Tomas's head. He smelled of warm milk and the faint plastic of recycled air. The skylight light slid another inch across the floor. 300 kilometers above her, the queen of the Vienek hegemony made another small clean note in her recorder, and lifted her bulb and drank. The Vienek had a word for what Queen Observer Isrith was doing, and the word translated badly into any human tongue, but the closest it came was witnessing. It was an old word in the Vienek language, older than the hegemony, older even than the long peace that had followed the hegemony's founding, and it carried within it the assumption that the watcher and the watched existed on different planes of moral consequence. To witness was to record without intervening. To witness was to permit a thing to happen, and to know it was happening, and to let the knowledge change you and not the thing. Isrith had been witnessing the human colony on Caelus Roman 4 for 47 of the moon's slow days. She had witnessed the strike that her own outer fleet had performed on the colony's mother ship in orbit, and she had witnessed the survivors crawling down into the dome on the moon's surface, and she had witnessed their slow, systematic collapse since. She had not interfered. The hegemony's protocols on first contact species were old and clear, observed to a statistical confidence of 95%, classify, then decide. She had been close to 95% for some time. She was hesitating. She was hesitating because the humans were strange. They were not strange in the way junior officers reported them strange, which was to say loud and ugly and quick to die. They were strange in a smaller way. They sang. They sang while they were dying. They sang to their offspring and to each other and sometimes to no one, just to fill the air with a vibration that served no biological purpose Isrith could identify. The Vienek did not sing. The Vienek had 3 vocalization modes: assertion, query, and grief was rare and always silent. To make sound for the sake of sound was an alien act, and Isrith, who had been an alien for all of her 7 cycles, had never encountered one. She had identified the human female designated specimen, 47, as a particularly clean case study. Specimen 47 was young, recently bereaved, in possession of an offspring with a respiratory failure that the dome's remaining medical supplies could not address. Specimen 47 was, by Vienek modeling, approximately 61 hours from terminal grief. Her offspring was approximately 29 hours from cessation. Isrith had bet against herself on whether the female would die first of the grief or of the dome failure, which the same models predicted at 53 hours. She drank again. The liquid was cold and slightly bitter, and it was the only indulgence she permitted herself during a long witness. Below, the moon turned and the dome breathed, and Charlotte Vance kept humming. Isrith had been a witness for 41 of her 7 cycles. She had witnessed the fall of 2 carbon civilizations and the long, slow plateau of a 3rd, and she had filed the records in their proper places, and she had not lost sleep over any of them, because sleep was not something Vienek queens did in the way carbon forms did, and because losing sleep over was a metaphor that did not translate into her grammar at all. She had been chosen for the work because she was the kind of queen who could watch. She had been told this when she was young. There are queens who cannot watch, her own mother had said, on the day Isrith had taken the witness oath. There are queens who reach for the world with both hands and they ruin what they touch. You are not one of those. You will watch. The watching will be enough. The watching had been enough. For 41 cycles it had been enough. Isrith was not unhappy. She did not have the equipment for unhappiness, not in the way carbon forms used the word. But she had begun in the last 7 cycles to notice a small still patch at the center of her witness, a place where nothing moved, a place where the witnessing had perhaps become too clean, too settled, too sure of itself. She had not told anyone about the still patch. She did not have the vocabulary. She drank her bulb and she watched her humans and she made her notes, and she ignored the still patch, and the still patch grew. It was growing now. She could feel it. She turned her head once on its long neck and the still patch did not move with her. It stayed where it was, behind her, just out of reach. In the morning, and morning was a word the dome kept using even though it meant nothing, Charlotte left Tomas with an old woman named Esma, who was from the Genoa block, and who had been the one to call the light Tintorella, and who had no children left of her own. Esma took Tomas with the small, careful sadness of a woman who knew she was being asked to hold something she might not be allowed to hold for long. She did not ask where Charlotte was going. She did not need to. Vel's office had been a storage room before the strike. He had moved into it because his original office was on the perimeter, and the perimeter had cracked. The storage room was deep in the center of the dome, where the air was thickest and the patches held longest, and Vel had taken the desk from a dead administrator, and the chair from a dead engineer, and the rug from a dead family, and he sat behind all of it with his hands folded as if he were running a country. He had 2 men outside the door. They were not soldiers. They had been clerks before. Now they had stun batons that Vel had pulled from the security locker, and they used the batons on anyone Vel told them to. They let Charlotte through because they recognized her, and because she was alone, and because women coming to see Vel alone was not new. She stood in front of his desk. He looked up from a tablet. He had the face of a man who had never been good-looking, and who had recently decided to stop trying. "Vance," he said, "what can I do for you?" "Antibiotics," she said, "for my son." "Your son is on the general list. The general list does not currently receive antibiotics. He is dying." "Many people are dying." He said it without cruelty. That was the worst part. He said it the way a clerk reads a number from a column. "What are you offering?" She put the ring on the desk. It had been her grandmother's. Pieter had cleaned it for her on their wedding morning, sitting on the edge of the bed in his undershirt, polishing it with the corner of a pillowcase. She had told him to stop, that the soap would ruin the gold, and he had not stopped, and the gold had not been ruined. Vel picked up the ring. He held it under the desk lamp. He set it down. And what? A ring is a ring. I have rings. The ring buys me nothing I cannot get from any other widow in this dome. What else? She had known he would say this. She had known it the whole walk over. She had rehearsed the answer in her head a dozen times, and each rehearsal had been worse than the last. She said the answer now. "My oxygen credits, the remainder of mine, I will sign them over." Vel did not move for a moment. Then he smiled, a small private smile that did not reach his mouth. "How many days do you have left?" 11. 11 days of breath in exchange for how many days of medicine? "Whatever you give me." He leaned back, the chair creaked. 3 days of broad spectrum. "That is what I have left of the pediatric strength." 3 days will not be enough. 3 days will be all you receive. Take it or do not. She took it. He had her sign the credit transfer on the tablet. She signed it Charlotte Vance, and below her name was Pieter's name from the marriage registry, and the system flagged it and asked her to confirm the widow's status, and she confirmed it, and her oxygen allotment dropped from 11 days to 0 days, effective at the next ration cycle, which was in 19 hours. She walked out of the office with the small white packet of pills in her hand. Esma was waiting in the corridor with Tomas. Charlotte did not say anything. Esma did not ask. Charlotte took her son back, and felt the small weight of him against her chest, and started humming again before she had thought to. She went back to the Genoa block to collect Tomas. Esma was sitting on the edge of her bunk, with Tomas asleep against her shoulder, and she was singing under her breath. The song was not the kettle song. It was something older in a dialect Charlotte did not know. Esma stopped when Charlotte came in. She did not ask. She passed Tomas across, and her hands, which were knotted and brown, and which had once made bread on a hill above a sea Charlotte had never seen, lingered for a moment under the small weight before they let go. "You will eat," Esma said. It was not a question. "I am not hungry." "You will eat, there is soup." "Sit." The soup was a thin gray thing made from the reconstituted protein that the dome had been eating for 60 days. Esma had added something to it, a small spoon of something pale, from a jar she kept hidden behind her bunk. The pale thing was, Charlotte realized when she tasted it, the last of Esma's olive oil, brought across 9 light years in a glass jar wrapped in 2 pairs of socks. Esma watched her eat. Charlotte ate. She did not cry. She had decided that crying was a thing she would do later, when there was time, and there was not yet time. "He is a good boy," Esma said. "Quiet, my Marco was a quiet baby. The quiet ones, you know, they listen. They listen to everything. They grow up and they remember." "Marco." "He is gone long ago." "Not here." Esma made a small gesture with her hand that meant earth, that meant before, that meant the country of the dead. "But the quiet they remember. Yours will remember you." Charlotte did not trust her voice. She nodded. "You give him the medicine," Esma said. "You give him half doses, don't give the full. He is small, his stomach is small, half is what the body wants. The other half you keep for the bad day. You hear me?" "I hear you." "And you sing." "I hum." Hum, sing, same thing. The sound goes in his bones. The sound is the road back if he goes anywhere. You hum loud. Charlotte nodded again. She finished the soup. Esma took the bowl from her hands and washed it in the small allotment of water she had drawn for the day. Then Esma did a thing she had never done before. In all the 11 weeks Charlotte had known her. She put her hand flat on the crown of Tomas's head, and she said something in the old dialect, 3 quick words, the way a priest might give a blessing in a church that no one had built yet. Then she turned away to fold her blanket, and the moment was over, and Charlotte got up and went to her own bunk. In her bunk that night she counted the pills. There were 18 of them, 3 a day for 3 days by the dosing chart on the packet. She broke 1 in half with her thumbnail and pressed half of the half against the inside of Tomas's cheek and watched him swallow. She would stretch them. 6 days at half dose, better than 3 at full. She knew it would not be enough. She did not know what would be enough. She lay down with him on the bunk and she put her ear against his chest, and she listened to the wet click of his small lungs, and she matched her breathing to his. She thought, against her will, of Pieter. She had not let herself think of him properly since the strike. There had not been room. Grief required a certain amount of empty space inside a person, and Charlotte had not had any empty space in 11 weeks. But the bunk was small, and Tomas was sleeping, and the dome was breathing its wet old man breath above her, and there was no work to do that could not be done by lying still, and the thought came in anyway, the way thoughts of the dead do, sideways, around the edges of better intentions. The last night, the night before the strike. They had been in the colony habitat module on the mothership, a small 2-room unit with a view of nothing because the porthole faced the cargo bay. Tomas had been 6 weeks old. He had not been sleeping well. Pieter had been on duty until midnight, and he had come in with that small, careful quietness men get when they are trying not to wake a baby, and the baby had been awake anyway, and Pieter had laughed and held out his arms. He had walked Tomas around the small room for an hour. Charlotte had pretended to sleep so that he could have the time. Pieter had not known she was awake. He had walked Tomas in a slow circle, and he had talked to him, very quietly, the way he had never talked to anyone else, not even to her, with a tenderness that he had kept hidden somewhere even from himself. He had told Tomas about the river he had grown up beside, about the way the river had frozen in winter, and how his own father had taken him out on it once when he was 4, holding his hand the whole way, on a pair of borrowed skates 2 sizes too big. He had told Tomas the names of the birds that came back to the river every spring. He had told Tomas the names of his own brothers, who were also gone, who had also been left behind on a world the colony ship would never see again. He had named them carefully, one by one, as if introducing them. Then he had stopped walking, and he had stood with his face very close to Tomas's face, and he had said, in the smallest voice Charlotte had ever heard him use, "I will keep you. I will keep you. I will keep you safe." He had said it 3 times. Like a vow, like a prayer, like a man who knew he was making a promise he might not be able to honor. He had not been able to honor it. He had been on the bridge when the VNX strike came through. He had been one of the first to die. Charlotte had not seen the body. The bridge had been one of the parts of the ship that had not made it down to the surface. She lay in her bunk now with their son against her chest, and she made the same promise. She did not say it out loud. She made it the way Pieter had made his 3 times in the smallest voice she had against the soft fontanelle at the top of Tomas's head. "I will keep you. I will keep you. I will keep you safe." She did not know if she could honor it either, but she had said it, and the saying mattered. The saying had always mattered. That was the thing. She slept then in pieces, with the cough beneath her ear and the moonlight crossing slowly above her, and the dome breathing its long, slow breath, and somewhere 300 kilometers above her a queen at a window watching, 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 and not yet knowing what she was about to see. Outside the dome, the moon turned, and Kalis rose, and the light came down through the cracked plex and lay across her body and her son's body like a cold blue blanket. 300 kilometers above, Isrith wrote in her log, "Specimen 47 has acquired insufficient medication through a low-status barter. Predicted offspring survival window now extended by approximately 40 hours. Total projected survival of subject, indeterminate, pending dome integrity event." She set the stylus down and rotated her head once on its long neck to ease a stiffness that had been growing in her thoracic ring. A junior, a male of the VNX 3rd caste, with the soft pale carapace that marked him still under his first molt, stood at the door. Queen Observer. "Speaker. The dome's structural integrity has degraded faster than the model. New projection is 26 hours to catastrophic failure." She considered. 26 hours was inside the survival window of her primary subject. The model would be invalidated. She would have to begin again with another colony, on another world, and there was no other colony on another world, not anywhere in the local arm, and the next first contact assessment would be 1,000 cycles or longer. She said, "Authorize the evacuation shuttle to remain on standby at the secondary pad." The junior hesitated. "Madam, the shuttle is ours." "The shuttle is empty. The shuttle has been parked there for 46 days. The humans do not know what it is. They know only that there is a shape on the far landing pad which they assume to be a relic of their own. Let them think so. Let them try to reach it. You will permit them to attempt evacuation in a VNX shuttle. I will permit them to die in one, or to live in one. Either outcome will be data." The junior bowed and withdrew. Isrith turned back to her observation window. She watched the slow turning of the moon. After a while, very quietly, she made a sound she had not made in 3 cycles. It was not assertion, not query, not grief. It was something she did not have a name for. She stopped almost as soon as she had started, and she looked around the empty chamber as if to be sure no one had heard, and then she lifted her bulb and drank, and she did not write the sound down in her log. The dome failed at the 7th hour of the next day cycle, which was not a day and not a cycle, and which the survivors had nonetheless agreed to call morning. It failed not at the obvious places, not at the cracked plex or the patch panels, but at a weld seam in the floor near the eastern airlock, where a micrometeor strikes 6 months before the strike had been repaired by an engineer who was already sick and who had not done the job well. The seam parted. The air went out. The alarms went off. The lights in the dome, the ones that still worked, turned the red they had been designed to turn during a depressurization event. And the dome, for the first time in many weeks, became fully and brightly lit, because there were a great many alarm lights, and they were all of them functioning, which was a small bitter triumph of design. Charlotte had been feeding Tomas the third half-pill of the day when the alarms went. She knew the sound. Everyone in the dome knew the sound. The drills had been run weekly until the engineers had died and then they had stopped, but everyone remembered. Hard suits in the lockers along the central corridor. Helmet seals checked by the buddy beside you. Move in pairs to the nearest sealed bulkhead. Wait for instruction. There were no instructions. The speakers were dead. The lights were red. The floor was tilting because the air pressure was pulling everything toward the breach. A wind had started, a thin high wind that should not have existed inside a dome, and the wind was the breath of the dome going out of it for the last time, and everyone could feel it on their faces, and everyone began to run. Charlotte ran with Tomas pressed against her chest. She reached the suit locker. The suits hung in their racks like skinned animals. She pulled one down. It was an adult medium. There was no other size in this locker. The children's suits had been in the eastern locker, which was on the other side of the breach, which was where the wind was going. She did not stop. She climbed into the suit. She zipped it to her sternum. Then she stopped and looked at her son. Tomas was crying. She could see his mouth working, but the alarms were so loud that she could not hear him. He was looking at her with the calm, unblaming attention of a child who has not yet learned that the world can fail. She did the thing. She unzipped the suit again, took him off her shoulder and tucked him into the suit with her, against her bare chest, inside the pressure layer, his small head just below her chin. She zipped the suit closed over both of them. She fastened the helmet. She broke the seal on her primary oxygen line at the chest port, and she pulled a length of soft tubing from a med pack on the locker shelf, and she spliced the line so that a branch went up to her helmet, and a branch went down inside the suit, against Tomas's face, and she crimped the lower branch with her teeth and pinched it half shut so that the pressure would feed but not blow. It was a thing Pieter had taught her, in a long-ago training drill, in a different life. He had taught her using a length of cocktail straw and a kitchen sponge, and she had laughed at him, and he had said, "Laugh now, it will save someone's life later." She had not believed him. She finished the splice. She tested it. Air moved. Tomas's small mouth opened against her sternum and he breathed. She turned to the door of the locker room and she ran. In the central concourse, people were running in every direction. Some were running for the airlocks. Some were running away from them for reasons she could not understand. She saw a man she had known slightly, a hydroponics tech named Gao, on the floor near the wall with a piece of plex through his thigh. She did not stop. She had a child against her ribs and she could not stop. Gao saw her go by and did not call after her. The eastern airlock was sealed. The southern airlock was sealed. The northern airlock was where the wind was going. The western airlock was open. It was open because Vel was at it. Vel had a suit on, a proper officer's suit, with the gold piping at the wrist that none of the civilians had. He had 2 of his clerks with him. They had the stun batons. They were not letting anyone through. They were letting some people through. Charlotte saw them let through a woman she recognized as the wife of a former lieutenant. She saw them let through a teenage boy who had been one of Vel's runners. She saw them turn back an old man and a young mother and a man with a child of perhaps 6. Vel was at the airlock control panel. He was overriding the queue. He was choosing. Charlotte got to the back of the crowd. She did not push forward. She did not have time for that. She did not have time for him at all. She watched him for half a second, the way he stood, the way his weight rested on his right foot, the way his head turned every few seconds to check his clerks. Then she went sideways, along the wall, away from the airlock, toward the maintenance hatch that the engineers had used to get to the outer service ring. The maintenance hatch was not on the evacuation map. The maintenance hatch was 3 meters of crawl space, and then an emergency-only egress with a manual seal. The maintenance hatch had no clerks at it because Vel had not thought to put any there. Pieter had shown her the maintenance hatch on the 3rd day after they had moved into the dome. He had said, in case the front door is ever crowded. He had said it as a joke. She had laughed. She opened the maintenance hatch. She crawled. She did not crawl well because of Tomas, but she crawled. The crawl space pressed against her helmet and against the bulge at her chest, and once she thought she felt Tomas's small fist push against the inside of her suit, against her skin in the dark, and she nearly stopped, because the touch was so small and so alive that it almost undid her. She did not stop. She did not stop. She kept crawling. The manual seal at the end of the crawl space was a wheel. She turned the wheel. The wheel turned hard at first and then easy. The hatch opened outward into vacuum, and the last of the air in the crawl space went out around her in a small, silent gust, and she was outside the dome. The light hit her first. Kalis filled the sky. The blue-green light came down across the gray dust of the moon's surface and across the curve of the dome behind her and across the shape, 400 meters away, of the shuttle on the far landing pad. The shuttle was not a human shuttle. She could see that now that she was looking at it from outside. It was the wrong color. It was the wrong shape. It was alien. She did not care. It had a door. It was a thing. It was the only thing. She began to walk. The walking was very hard. The suit was old and stiff, and it had been built for a slightly larger body, and the joints did not bend the way her joints wanted to bend. The dust was deep. Tomas was a small living weight against her chest, and every step jostled him, and she could feel through the chest wall of the suit when he coughed because the cough vibrated against her sternum, and she counted the coughs as she walked, the way a sailor in another century might have counted bells. She hummed. She did not know if her voice was reaching him through the suit, but she hummed anyway, the old kettle song, her mother's song, the song Pieter had teased her for, and her breath fogged the inside of the helmet, and the fog cleared and the fog came back. 100 meters out, she looked back once. She could see the dome behind her. She could see the western airlock from the outside. She could see Vel in his gold-piped suit stepping out of the airlock with one of his clerks. She could see him stop 3 steps from the door and put his hand to his helmet. She could see him fall. She would learn later what had happened. She would learn that Vel's suit had been improperly maintained, because Vel had stopped letting the maintenance crews near his personal gear, because he had not trusted them. She would learn that a seal at his neck had blown almost immediately upon exposure to vacuum. She would learn that he had died fast. She did not learn it then. She just turned around and kept walking. 200 meters out, Tomas stopped coughing. She did not let herself feel anything. She kept walking. She told herself it meant the cough had passed. She told herself it meant the antibiotics had done their work. She told herself many things. She kept humming. Her voice was hoarse now and the song was breaking in the middle, and she did not care. She kept it going. She kept her lips moving against the helmet glass. 300 meters out, her suit's oxygen warning chimed. The chime was small and polite, and it meant that her primary tank was at 15%. She had spliced her oxygen line 2 ways, 1 branch for her, 1 branch for Tomas, and she was using the air twice as fast as she should have been, and she had known this when she had done it, and she had done it anyway. She kept walking. The dust came up in slow, soft clouds with every step, and the clouds hung in the airless cold, hung without falling, because there was no air to push them down, and she walked through them as if through standing smoke. The light kept moving. The light was the only thing in the world that moved with her. Kalis had risen another finger's width higher in the sky, and the long blue shadow her body cast was longer now, and the long shadow of her body included a small bulge at the chest, a second smaller silhouette, and she watched her own shadow as she walked, and she counted it as proof. As long as the shadow had the bulge, The bulge was still there. The bulge was still her son. Her mother's song had run out somewhere around 250 meters. She did not have any more song. She had hummed it through 3 full times, and the third time had been ragged, and she could not remember now if she was still humming or if her lips were just moving against the helmet glass without sound. It did not matter. She kept her lips moving. The vibration was the road back, Esma had said. She kept the road open. 300 kilometers above her, Queen Observer Isrith was watching. She was watching through 3 different optical arrays and 1 thermal array and 1 micropressure array that mapped the surface of every walking thing on the moon below. She was watching Specimen 47 cross the open ground. She was watching the small bulge inside the suit, where her sensors told her there was a second heartbeat, a fast small one, a few centimeters below the larger slower one of the adult. She watched the second heartbeat. The VNEC pressure modeling was very precise. The pressure modeling said the second heartbeat should not be a heartbeat anymore. The pressure modeling said that an infant of that mass, that age, that lung capacity, sharing a suit's atmosphere with an adult under a spliced line system at half-feed pressure, should have suffered fatal hypoxia within the first 100 meters of the crossing. The pressure modeling said that the small heart should have stopped beating somewhere around the 120-meter mark. The small heart was beating at 310 meters. Isrith set down her bulb. The bulb did not fall. She had set it down carefully by long habit. But she set it down all the way down, and she leaned forward in her observation throne, and she made a small low sound at the back of her thoracic ring that was not a sound she had a name for, the same sound she had made the day before, and this time she did not look around the empty chamber, because the chamber was no longer empty. The junior was there again, with a new report. He stopped in the doorway when he heard the sound. "Madam, continue. The dome has fully depressurized. Casualty count on the surface is 291. 18 made it into the standby shuttle on the western pad before the breach. 3 are en route to the eastern shuttle, including Specimen 47 and her offspring." "The offspring?" "Madam, the offspring is alive." "Yes, madam, the second heartbeat is still." "You said it would be dead." "I did, madam," the model said. "The model is wrong." She said it quietly. She said it the way a doctor in another century might have said the bone is healed after all. She said it with the small, clean disgust of being wrong. She stood up. She had not stood up during a witness in 7 cycles. She stood up and she walked to the observation window, and she looked down through it at the small, bright surface of the moon, where a small, bright suit was walking across a bright field of dust, and she said, very quietly in her own language, in the formal mode reserved for the correction of a hegemony record, "Annotate. Specimen 47. The infant has survived the vacuum." She turned back to the junior. The junior was very still. He had never seen her stand. He had never seen her annotate in formal mode. He had not been alive the last time these things had happened. She said, "Prepare a descent. I will meet the shuttle." He stared at her. "Madam, do it." Outside, on the surface of the moon, Charlotte Vance reached the 400-meter mark. The shuttle was in front of her. Up close, it was not the wrong shape after all. It was simply a shape she had not seen before, low and curved and softer than a human craft, with the kind of seams a human engineer would not have thought to use. There was a door. The door had a panel beside it. The panel was lit. Beside the lit panel was a symbol that Charlotte did not recognize, and beside the symbol was a smaller symbol, very small, very low, almost at the level of her hand, that Charlotte did recognize, because it was the universal pictograph for press here for atmosphere, the same symbol that had been on every human airlock she had ever used in her life. Someone had put it there for her, or for whoever came. Someone had known, someone had been ready. She pressed it. The door opened. The air went in. It was warm. It smelled wrong, too sweet, too metallic, but it was air. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her. A second door, the inner door, opened. She walked through. She stood in a small, bright room with a curved ceiling and a smooth floor and walls that were the wrong color, a pale, soft green like the inside of a leaf. And she did not care. She sat down on the floor hard because her legs had stopped, and she fumbled at her helmet seal with hands that would not work properly, and she got the helmet off, and she unzipped the suit, and she pulled her son out. He was the color of skim milk gone slightly blue. His eyes were closed. He was very still. She held him against her bare chest, skin to skin, and she put her ear against his mouth, and she waited, and she could not breathe, and she could not move, and the small room around her seemed to go away. Then she felt it. A wet, ragged breath against her ear, then another, then a small, thin sound that might have been a cry. She started to laugh. She laughed and she cried and she laughed again, and her body was shaking. And Tomas, small and blue and pinpricked across his cheeks with the burst capillaries of vacuum exposure, opened his eyes and looked at her, and his small mouth opened, and he made a sound like a kitten, and she pressed her forehead against his forehead, and she kept humming in pieces now, because the laughing kept getting in the way of the song. She did not see the inner door of the room open. She did not see the figure that came through it. She only knew that someone was there when she felt the temperature in the room shift, and when she looked up. Queen Observer Isrith of the Vienek hegemony stood in the doorway. She was very tall, nearly 3 meters, and her body was the kind of body that did not have a single shape but several shapes layered on each other, a long thoracic ring and a longer abdominal ring, and a small fine head on a neck that bent in places a human neck could not bend. Her carapace was the deep black of an old riverbed. Her eyes, there were 4 of them, were arranged in a small square, and they were the color of old wine. She held a bulb in one of her hands. The bulb had liquid in it. The liquid was the same pale color it had been 3 hours ago when Isrith had been watching from the tower, but Isrith's hand around the bulb was not quite steady, and a drop of the liquid had run down the outside of the bulb, and was making its slow way along the curve of one of her forefingers. She looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at her. Tomas, against Charlotte's chest, opened and closed his small hands. Isrith said, in the trade tongue that the Vienek had developed during the long peace, with the careful diction of a queen who has not used another species' grammar very often, "Your infant is alive." Charlotte stared at her. She did not understand at first that the words were in her own language. Then she did. "Yes," she said. "He was in the vacuum." "Yes." For approximately 740 seconds. Charlotte did not know how long it had been. She had counted Tomas's coughs and not the time. "If you say so." "My models," Isrith said and stopped. She tried again. "My model said he would die at 120 meters. He didn't. I see that." There was a long silence. In the silence, Isrith lifted the bulb to her face. She did not drink. She held it there for a long moment as if she had forgotten what to do with it. Then her hand opened. The bulb fell. It hit the floor of the small bright room and it bounced once, very softly. Vienek bulbs were tough. They were designed for ships, and it did not break, but the seal at its top jolted, released. The pale liquid hissed out across the floor in a slow, steady, spreading puddle. The smell that rose from it was the smell of old leaves and sweet metal, and something like ozone. Isrith looked down at the puddle. She looked at it for a long time. The junior appeared behind her in the doorway. He had been waiting in the corridor. He saw the queen, standing very still in front of a human female with an infant on her chest, with a spilled bulb at her feet, and he froze. Isrith said without turning, "Junior." "Yes, madam." "Make the following annotation to my witness record." "Yes, madam." Specimen 47's offspring has survived an exposure to hard vacuum of approximately 12 1/3 minutes, at a shared feed atmospheric pressure of approximately 1/2 standard, having been carried in skin contact with the parent in an unrated adult pressure garment. This event invalidates the hegemony's primary models of human respiratory fragility. Recommend full reclassification of the species, pending. She stopped. She had been speaking in the formal mode. She switched now into the older mode, the witness mode, the one that had no equivalent in human grammar but which any VNEC aide would understand. Her voice softened. It became less of a voice and more of a vibration along her thoracic ring. Pending, she said, the receipt of further data on the conditions under which the impossible becomes routine. The junior was writing. He had not stopped writing. Isrith looked back at Charlotte. You hummed, she said, through the crossing. Charlotte did not know how to answer that. Yes. Why? For him, she looked down at Tomas. He was still making the kitten sound, so he would hear something. In a sealed suit, in vacuum, he could not have heard. He could feel it in my chest. Isrith considered this. The 4 wine-dark eyes did not blink. VNEC eyes did not blink, but something behind them moved. She said, the vibration, through the bone. I don't know about the bone. He liked it. From inside before, he liked it then, so I did it now. And this is why you hummed. Yes. And the song. My mother's, her mother's, I think, from a long way back. You sang an old song while you walked through a vacuum that was going to kill your offspring. Yes. To keep him calm. Yes. And to keep yourself calm. Charlotte thought about that. She had not thought about it before. Yes, she said, both. Isrith was quiet for a long time. The puddle of pale liquid kept spreading slowly across the floor of the small bright room. She did not pick up the bulb. She did not look at it. Finally she said, we had nearly decided. The hegemony's models of your species had reached the threshold for classification. What does that mean? It means we had nearly decided what to do with you. And now she paused. Her head moved slightly on its long neck. Now the models are wrong. Now we will need to begin again. Now I will need to report to my hegemony that everything we believed about the carbon form known as human is incomplete, because an infant of your species survived an environment that should have killed any adult of mine in 14 seconds, while his mother sang to him through her own bones, and the model did not predict this, and the model cannot predict this, because the model was built by people who do not sing. Charlotte did not know what to say to that. He's hungry, she said after a moment, because Tomas was beginning to root against her chest, the small instinct of the very young. Do you have anything I can feed him? Isrith looked at her. The 4 eyes were very still. Then the queen, who had not given a thing to another being in 7 cycles, who had built her life around the principle of witnessing without intervening, who had drunk pale liquid alone in a tower of black glass for 47 of a moon's slow days, said, Yes, I will find something. She turned to the junior. She gave instructions in her own language. The junior bowed and left at a run. Isrith turned back to Charlotte. She bent her long body slowly, until she was nearly at the height of a tall human, and she sat, in the strange folded way of her people, the legs bent backward against the floor on the deck of her own shuttle, in front of a young woman from a dying colony with a half-blue infant on her chest, and she did not say anything for a while, and the puddle of pale liquid touched the edge of Charlotte's boot, and Charlotte did not move her boot. After a while Charlotte said, What's your name? Isrith, the full version is longer. Charlotte. And he's Tomas. Tomas. The junior came back. He had something in his hands, a soft container of something white, and a thin tube and a small heated plate. He set them down on the floor by Isrith. He bowed again and withdrew. Isrith said, The substance is a protein analog. Our young consume it in the first cycle. The chemistry is, it is not exactly your kind, but it is close enough to sustain. The texts say, "We have never had occasion to test." You have texts on feeding human babies. We have texts on feeding many things. We are an old people. Charlotte took the soft container. She warmed a small amount on the plate. She touched a drop to her own wrist, the way her mother had taught her, the way her mother's mother must have taught her mother, the small unbroken chain of women checking the temperature of milk on their own skin. The drop was warm and not hot. She put a little into the thin tube and she held it to Tomas's mouth. He latched. He drank. She started to cry. She did not know she was going to cry until she was crying, and she could not stop, and she did not try to stop, and the tears ran down her face and onto Tomas's small head and into the soft fuzz of his hair, and Israth sat across from her and watched with the 4 wine-dark eyes and did not say anything and did not look away. After a long time Israth said very quietly, "What is the song?" Charlotte wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Which one?" "The one you hummed on the walk. It doesn't have words, not that I know, my mother just hummed it." "Will you hum it again?" Charlotte looked at her. The queen of the Vienneck hegemony, on the floor of her own shuttle, with her bulb spilled, and a junior somewhere down the corridor and the dead colony cooling on the surface of the moon below, was asking a young human widow to hum. Charlotte hummed. She hummed for a long time. She hummed until Tomas stopped drinking and fell asleep against her chest with a small bubble of the white substance at the corner of his mouth. She hummed until her own voice gave out, and then she hummed past that in a smaller voice, almost a whisper, and Israth listened. The 4 eyes did not move. The thoracic ring vibrated very slightly, in time, in a way Charlotte did not see and could not have read. When the song was done, Israth said, "Thank you." "You're welcome." "I will need to take you somewhere," Israth said. "There are 18 of your people on the Western shuttle. There are 2 on the Eastern shuttle besides you. We will need to take you all somewhere. The hegemony will need to decide what to do." "What will you tell them?" Israth was quiet. She lifted one of her long fingers slowly and touched the edge of the spilled puddle. The liquid wet the tip of her finger. She did not lift the finger to her mouth. She held it there. She looked at the small bead of pale liquid on her own fingertip, and then she looked at the sleeping infant on Charlotte's chest, and she looked back at the finger. "I will tell them," she said, "that we were wrong, that the model is wrong, that we will need new models, that the carbon forms of this species are stranger than we had reckoned, and they are stronger than we had reckoned, and they sing while they die, and their infants do not die when we predict, and their mothers walk where we said they would not walk, and they hum songs whose words have been lost for so long that no one remembers what the songs are about, and they hum the songs anyway, because the humming is the point. I will tell them that I dropped my bulb." "Did you?" "Yes." Charlotte looked at the puddle. "I'm sorry." "Do not be sorry. I have not dropped a bulb in 7 cycles. The dropping it was important. I needed to drop a bulb. I needed to be a queen who drops a bulb. It will go in the witness record. It will go in the formal annotation. The hegemony will read about it and they will know. They will know that I was wrong, and that I knew I was wrong, and that I dropped a bulb when I learned it. Is that bad for you?" "It is necessary. There is a difference." She stood up slowly, the long body unfolding in the strange folded way of her people. She looked down at Charlotte and Tomas. She bent her head once in a movement that was not quite a bow. "Charlotte," she said. "Yes. When the hegemony decides what to do, I will be there. I will speak. I have a vote. I have not used it in 7 cycles. I will use it now." "For what?" Israth did not answer at first. She turned her head to look out, through the small port of the shuttle, at the surface of the moon, where the dome lay broken, and where the dust was settling slowly in the blue-green light of Kalis, and where her own observation tower hung as a slow, bright star at the edge of the sky. "For the carbon form that sings," she said, "while it walks through a thing that should kill it, for the model that was wrong, for the infant who lived. She turned back, she looked at Charlotte, she said, "Sleep if you can, I will return." She walked out. The door closed behind her, soft and quiet on a seal Charlotte did not understand. The puddle of pale liquid kept spreading slowly across the floor, and Charlotte did not move, because Tomas was asleep, and she did not want to wake him, and the small warmth of him against her chest was the only warm thing in the universe she had left. She hummed very quietly the kettle's song, her mother's song, Pieter's song, the song with the lost words. The shuttle was quiet around her. Above, in her tower of black glass, Queen Observer Isrith of the Viennek hegemony stood at her observation window for a long time, looking down at the broken dome, and at the bright dust, and at the small shape of her own shuttle on the eastern pad with a human female asleep inside it, and the four wine-dark eyes were very still, and the thoracic ring vibrated very slightly, in time with a song she could not have known, and yet somehow did. She lifted her hand. She looked at the small bead of pale liquid still on her fingertip. She did not wipe it off. She let it dry there. She thought, for the first time in 7 cycles, that she would like to learn how to make a sound for no reason. She thought she would like to learn to hum. Below on the moon, the light moved across the dust, slow and blue and a little green at the edges, and Charlotte Vance slept with her son on her chest, and her son breathed, and the breath was wet and small and ragged and alive, and somewhere in the long, unbroken chain of women who had checked milk on their own wrists, somewhere far back, a woman had hummed a song without words, and the song had carried, and the song was still carrying, and the song would carry across vacuum, across worlds, across queens, across the cold blue tan of an alien moon, for as long as there were any of them left to hum it at all. And there would be.